Good afternoon. Welcome at the second part of this seminar. And we have here Evelien Spruyt from the University of Antwerp, and she will do her presentation.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Some claps. So, hello everyone. As Nick already mentioned, I'm Evelien Spruyt from the University of Antwerp, and I will be telling you something in the coming half an hour about designing tasks for effective and successful telecollaboration exchanges. So first, a little bit about me. So I graduated last year in 2018 in July from the teacher training at the University of Antwerp, and I was looking for a job, and I met Joseph Kolpaert. He was teacher in the teacher training as well, and he was working on the Tekola project. And for me, it was ideal because I could combine my two passions. So being teaching on one hand and then research on the other hand. It's both combined in the Tekola project. So I jumped at the chance. I was like, yes, this is what I wanted to do. And I started working in September last year. And I'm working together with Joseph Kolpaert at the University of Antwerp, but he won't be coming today, unfortunately, so I have to do this myself. And we are focusing in the University of Antwerp, especially on task design and motivation. So we try to design a model that teachers could use when they are creating their tasks, and that can help them make more engaging and more motivating tasks for their learners. So I will be telling you something about that now. So a little warning first. I will be using some examples, but as you all know, examples are always standard in these kinds of presentations. So I may give an example and you may think, well, but that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to my learners. I'm well aware of that. You always have to think of your own context. You always have to think of your own learners. These are just examples. So I will be illustrating task autonomy, so giving your learners more freedom in executing tasks. But if your learners are not used to having autonomy, it is something that you have to introduce gradually into your classes. So that is something you have to keep in mind during this presentation. These examples are just standard. These are just for illustrating. So the starting point for developing our model was, of course, TBLT is an amazing movement. We all know this. So in TBLT, you don't just give vocabulary, you don't just give grammar, you give your learners a task. And they then are language users. They don't just learn the language, they also use it in these tasks. And these tasks also are authentic. So for example, by executing tasks, your learners will learn how to visit the doctor in the target language, because this is something that could well happen when they're on a holiday, that they have to visit the doctor. And that's an amazing movement, TBLT, but we saw some gaps in theory and in practice. And the first gap was that task design, there was not much information about this. So yes, you have to execute these tasks with your learners, but how do you create these tasks? Where do you start? So that's the first gap we saw. And then the second gap was mental acceptance and motivation. Yes, you learn your learners how to visit a doctor. It's very authentic. But why should they be motivated to learn this? Why is this a motivating task for them? And that's something that we wanted to include in our model as well. So the main question then was, how can we help teachers to make more motivating tasks during this process? So when they are designing the task, how can we help them to incorporate elements to make it more motivating? And the answer to that, according to us, is our task design model. I won't be going into detail about the model, but it's just some dimensions we think could have an influence on the motivation of your learners. And the first thing I want to say about this is that we just hope it inspires you. If one of you here thinks, oh, that's interesting, that aspect, I would like to use that in one of my tasks in the future, then we are happy. We don't want to say you have to use this, because that's not the case. We just want to inspire you with it. It's a theoretical model because we work at a university. Things have to be a little bit theoretical, but I will try and explain it today with some examples so that it becomes a little more practical for you. And the main thing, according to us, is that task design is a juggling act. So, you know, with the balls, I can't do it, so I won't do it now because that would be ridiculous. But it's not only pedagogy that counts, it's not only practical requirements, because a lot of the time you want to make a task and you just think, oh, what do I want them to learn and what is easy to execute? But we think there are some other things that you may want to take into account as well. And the first thing, of course, this is an overview because pedagogy is important and you can make countless learning goals. So you can test knowledge, skills, insight, and attitude for all these different subjects and components. And that's important, of course it is. But then, what do you do when your learners aren't motivated? What do you do then? And we say, well, just hide the actual learning goals behind some other activating layers so they don't know that they're learning anything. It's a really easy trick. So we have 3 layers that we think you can add into your tasks so that your learners wouldn't notice that they are learning anything. And the first one is task autonomy. So the definition is there, but it's basically the degree you're giving your learners when they are executing something. How much choice do they have? And we say, well, there are 4 types of autonomy in tasks. So you can give them a fixed task. They can't choose anything. It's just a task. You can say, well, here's the task, but you can choose something. The third one is you can give them a task and say, well, this is my idea, but now you can negotiate among your peers and just say what you think about it. Do you want to do another proposal to me as a task? And then the last thing, which we recommend only for more advanced learners and learners that like to challenge themselves, is to let them design a task themselves. So they know what they've been learning and then say, well, now you can choose how you want to put this into practice in a task. So now just a short example to illustrate this. And the example I will be taking is an art theme. This could be something that's addressing CLIL as well. So say you want your learners to do asynchronous video communication. You can use Big Blue Button, which is one of the Tekola tools. And you want to do something about art. You can then let one of your students in a group work together with students of your partner in a group. And your group, for example, gets a painting and they have to describe the painting to the other students, so the students of your partner, and they have to actually draw the painting themselves. And then after they are done, they can show it via the video communication. So I can hear it now. Well, that's not really authentic. When will you do this? No, it's not really authentic. But being able to give a description about form and size is always useful in another target language. You can always encounter this. So that's why this task was chosen. So then when you do the task, as I just described, it's fixed. Your students get the painting, they don't have any choice, they have to do it. But you can also give them some choice. You can let them choose the painting, for example, themselves, so that they know that the painting they get will be within their competences, that they don't have to describe anything that they really won't know. Or you can present this task to them and just say, well, now you can discuss this among yourselves. And if you want something to change about this task, you can come to me and you can tell me. So for example, when they want to record the description, that's also possible. They can just say it to you then. And then the last part of the last type is when they have done a unit or a theme about art and you've done everything and then you say, well, this was our theme about art and now I want you to put this into practice and come up with an own telecollaborative task yourself. So that's the last type. So that was autonomy. Then the second layer to hide the actual learning goal is then activity type. So of course you let your students tell something, just one-way communication data like we are doing now. I'm telling you something, you're listening. Second one, you can let them interact with one another, two-way communication, but you can also let them do something or you can let them make something, which then results in making an artifact. So artifacts on this slide, there are a lot of things they can make. So you have a lot of choices as teacher to let your students make something. So again here, when the learner motivation is low, or when you have a challenging context, that's our hypothesis, we think that it would be interesting to hide the actual learning goal behind the last two, so behind doing something or making something, because then your students will be investing in what they are doing and they won't be noticing that they're learning something. So again, an example, and it's a general example when you're doing a study trip. The first type, telling something. So when you're planning a study trip, you can let each student do some research about one part of the study trip. So basic example, when they're going to Paris, you say, well, we're visiting the Louvre. You can do some research about the Louvre and tell the students of your partner something about the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower, for example. That's just telling. Then you can also let them interact. So you're planning a study trip and your partner is planning a study trip, and you let your students talk about the study trip. And what may also be interesting is to consider letting them fill in a table, for example, so that they really have to listen to each other, because otherwise they're just telling it to each other and they're like, yes, well, okay. But when you're letting them fill in a graph, they will really have to listen and they will have to negotiate meaning. And then they really have to interact. Oh, I haven't got this in my graph. Can you tell me something about? That's interacting. Then the third type, doing. We've had a wonderful example of a virtual study trip just now before noon, which was the treasure hunt in the Tekala virtual world. That's doing something. They are really doing something together. And then the last type, making something. Interesting example is when both students or both partners are planning a study trip. You can let each student or group of students make a travel blog, which is something that's really hip and trendy right now. So let them make a travel blog in which they really get to write something. And then the final activating layer is using, this sounds very difficult, but it's just using basic psychology in your tasks. So we believe that a task will be more engaging and motivating when it is meaningful, useful, and rewarding. So meaningful just means that it means something, that it's authentic, that it is something that students know they will do in real life, that they will need. So in secondary school, for example, you hear this a lot when students are doing maths and they're doing all these calculations, and then they're like, yes, but what does this mean? What will I do with this later on? And that is something that you can incorporate in languages so easy. Just make it something meaningful. And then the second thing is usefulness. So if they make something or they do something and they know that they can use it later on, that's also, according to us, more motivating. And then the last one, rewarding. It's a little bit complex, but it just means that there is a reward for the student's self-image or for their universal needs. They know they are competent when they do this task. They get a feeling of, oh, I can do this now. So with some concrete examples, meaningful, for example, is, think about an example. Let's go to useful first. Useful is when you let them do some collaborative writing. This is something that is an easy to do telecollaborative activity. So let them do some collaborative writing, students of your partners, with your students. And then the product they get will be used as learning material, for example, later on. So they aren't just writing for the sake of, oh, I will get marks on this. No, they will have to learn this later on. They will have to use this. And then rewarding is, I am also following some teachers, and one of the teachers said to me, well, it's very difficult, telecollaboration, because they have to get out of their comfort zone. My students have to get out of their comfort zone. But then once they do it and they notice, well, I can do this, their self-image goes up. Then she said, those are the students in the next lessons that will be more active. You will see them really coming out of their shell and being like, oh yes, I can do this now. I can participate in these classes. And then meaningful, I thought about it now. A good example would be in a telecollaborative task, letting them exchange something about airports or about public transport. So because youth nowadays, they're always traveling, so that they know, for example, well, if I lose my luggage in your country, what do I have to do? Because we mostly know what we have to do in our own country, but when I get there, what do I have to do? Or if I arrive at the airport, what is the public transport? How does this work? So that's something meaningful. And we believe that you don't have to combine this all into one task. That's just impossible. But when you notice, wow, my learners aren't really motivated for these tasks, that you can maybe use these dimensions and get them in your tasks and make sure that your students aren't noticing as much that they are learning. Yes, 5 minutes, but I'm actually done, so that's good. A lot of room for discussion, see. So this is the part for the questions and the discussion. I don't know if there are any questions. Well, there aren't any questions, so I'll ask you a question. Is this something you see yourself doing? For example, giving your students more freedom? Or do you say, well, I already do this? Is there someone that wants to comment on that? We all just had lunch. We're tired. Just leave us alone, please. What are you going to do?
Maybe they're afraid that I will throw it too hard.
Don't attack them. Yes.
Hi, well, sorry to start. I'm not a teacher, so I cannot answer your question. But we were saying to each other, these are actually maybe general teaching tips. Is there a difference, according to you, between telecollaboration, didactics in this way and normal teaching?
Our model is built within the Tekola project, so it has to entail this telecollaboration, and we are testing this model on telecollaborative situations. But as you said, indeed, the model can just be transferred to other learning situations as well. Yes, that's true.
But in what you were explaining, are there things in telecollaboration that you found are really different than a usual situation?
I think there are things that are maybe more easy to do, such as meaningful. That's a really good example as to why telecollaboration can help you there. Because as we said before with the intercultural component, when you're just doing a role play there, yes, in your class, what does it mean? But if you can really let them communicate with another student from maybe another culture, they can really get to know each other, and that's meaningful. So that's something, indeed, autonomy you can use in a normal classroom situation as well, but then the meaningfulness will be much more easy to incorporate in telecollaboration.
And now you have more the world as your playground. Actually.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
indeed, beautifully said.
You said about do not tell the students what they're gonna learn.
Yes.
But how do you know that? How do we know that they know that it's meaningful? Yeah.
Oh. Yes, that's true. That's true. So it depends on the students, and that's something we are noticing as well. Because Joseph Colbert always said, you give them a task, and it's a click in their head. Yes, I want to do this. Oh, no, I don't want to do this. And this is something that is difficult. But I think when you know your students and you can try to figure this out as well at the beginning of the school year, just ask them, well, what do you think will be useful for you to learn this year that you can be using in everyday life? And then you can incorporate this. It's just students will always know that they're learning something, but you can try and hide it a little bit. For example, with the negotiation, so a task with negotiation, you can let them negotiate, and what we always say is then they will be focused on, oh, we can make this task as we want to execute it, and they will be forgetting, we hope, a little bit that they are learning, and they will be focusing on what are we going to do, how are we going to change this, but they will always know that they're learning. Yes.
So I really agree with the fact that giving learners more autonomy is very important. But I also notice with my students that it's not always an easy thing to achieve since they're not really used to it. So is there scaffolding to get to this task by learners? Do you think all learners would get there, or is it just for a small group of advanced learners? And can you give them, can you help them reaching that? Do you start with a fixed task, then give some choices and build it up like that? Or
Yes, it's, as I said, it's really dependent on context and learner. But I think that you can introduce it. I don't think maybe not all learners will get to the task they can design themselves, or even the task with negotiation, because it depends on context. But I do think you can try with a fixed task and then give them some choice. And if it doesn't work, you can discuss this with your learners as well. Do they want these choices? Do they think this is necessary? Because it can be that they say, well, I don't need the choices, and then you can maybe try some of the other dimensions. It's just, yes, it's, as you say, it's dependent on learner in every context.
it's also part of autonomy, is also choice.
Yes. So you can try and incorporate it. That's true, and you can try with fixed task and then some freedom, and you can expand it. But yes. Then there was a question here in the front, I thought. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. I like the idea of hiding the idea of learning. However, I personally believe that it depends a bit on the age group. If I think of my group of A-level students, of course, I do meaningful tasks, cultural tasks, and playful tasks as well. But they usually just before the A-levels, they want to see why we're doing things. So I think it really depends. And sometimes you have to be transparent. Say, okay, today we're playing, we're doing this and that activity, a role play, but in the end, you're going to learn, we're going to prepare for the communicative exam or something like that.
Yes, that's true as well. You can't always hide that you're learning. I mean, you're still in school, you're still in class. So that's true, but you can try and yes.
Yes, but I think sometimes some groups of students, they want to learn. So they have this need and they don't want to have the feeling we haven't learned anything today. We have just played the game or something. They want to have this kind of transparency and want to be told that they do in fact learn something.
Yes.
So I think it depends.
It's true. It really depends. Any more questions? No? No questions online? So can we move on to the next presentation then, I think? Oh, 7 more minutes. Phil, what am I going to do? I'm not an avatar in the virtual world. I don't have these amazing moves you have, Nick. Yes. Yes, so as Petra said, we'll have a short break, then the next one can set up, and you can talk to your neighbor about this.